Hello, Wellspring. It is December the 9th, and we are still in 1 Peter. We're moving on to chapter 3. I'm reading from the NIV. Let's get after it today. Wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your own husband, so that, if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives. When they see the purity and reverence of your lives, your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For this is the way the holy women of the past, who put their hope in God, used to adorn themselves. They submitted themselves to their own husbands, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord. You are her daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with respect as their weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. Finally, all of you be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. For whoever would love life and see good days must keep their tongues from evil and their lips from deceitful speech. They must turn from evil and do good. They must seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Who is going to harm you if you are eager to do good? But even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed. Do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. For it is better, if it is the will of God, to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. After being made alive, he went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits, to those who were disobedient long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah, while the ark was being built. In it, only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through the water. And this water symbolizes baptism that now saves you. Also, not the removal of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a clear conscience towards God. It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at God's right hand, with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him. And so we find ourselves in this passage starting out with this text that could feel to our modern ears a little bit awkward, a little bit off, right? With this idea of wives, submit to your husbands, live in quietness and peace. What Peter's getting at here is within the cultural context, he's encouraging wives who have unbelieving husbands to do everything they can to operate in the way that a quote unquote dignified wife should, not for the sake necessarily of their husband's glory, but so that their husband might see Jesus in them. So that their submission, while to their husband, is in reality to Jesus. And so they're acting in love, they're acting in patience, they're acting with humility, they're acting in submission in order that this pure life, that these good deeds might flip the script for the husband, and the husband might begin to recognize there's something different about my wife. She's changing. She's different in a beautiful way. What is it? And then it opens up the door without having to give proclamation to the gospel with her words. She's giving it by by her actions, right? It opens up the door for her to be able to convey through her life the message of the gospel, the truth of Jesus Christ, that her husband may become a believer through her submission. Because in this time period, a woman couldn't challenge a man's thinking. She couldn't say to her husband, this is what you ought to do. You ought to look at Jesus. You ought to consider Jesus, right? No, she had to win him by her actions, by her journey, by the life she lived out. And so Peter's really encouraging women to do this. And notice he talks to the believing husbands as well, right? And says, husbands, those of you who are believing, in the same way, you ought to be sympathetic and love one another, speaking of their wives, right? Be gentle. Be concerned with the fact that there are some differences between men and women, and care about the women in your life that God has given you. Care about your wives in a particular way that demonstrates that you recognize the differences between masculinity and femininity, between man and woman, and take care of her heart. Cherish her. Treat her as she deserves to be treated, as a child of God, as a royal priestess unto her God, as a chosen special possession of God, right? That's part of your role. And in doing that, you demonstrate a love that Christ has for you, who is part of the church, who's been adopted and grafted into the family. And so while initially that could feel a little bit hard for us in our modern ears, we have to process it in cultural context. We have to process what's being said here. So the idea here is, again, this mutual submission, the unbelieving spouse doing whatever is necessary to open up the door for their spouse to become believing through submission, through gentleness, through humility, not through some aggressive assault or barrage of religious dogma, right? That's not going to be the transition point. It's going to be a life lived honoring Christ. And then for us as spouses to recognize there are differences between men and women. Men need to be loved and respected in this way. Women need to be loved and respected in this way. And I know that those are stereotypes and they're not always exactly how it breaks out. But in general, there's these differences that we wrestle with, right? And so let's embrace those things about one another in our relationships, in our marriages, and let's serve each other well. Let's submit to one another to be a good example to the world around us, right? And the second half of this chapter gets into this idea of suffering for doing good. Just like Jesus suffered on the cross, and his resurrection is what brings us up out of the baptism waters, right? It's what we're doing when we get baptized. I'm dying to my flesh. I'm dying to this life. I'm dying to the desires of this world, and I'm being raised into new life with Jesus Christ. I'm being raised into his resurrection out of the waters of death. In the same way, Noah and his family are saved through the flood, through the baptism of the ark, right? Through the going into the death and then the resurrection of Christ. This is what saves us. It's the resurrection of Christ. It's the work of Jesus. And so if we're in the suffering, if we're in the baptism, if we're going down, we also can have faith and hope that we will be brought up. And the suffering of going down, the suffering of dying to the flesh, will produce in us a righteousness, will produce in us a perfection, not by our works, but through the finished work of Jesus Christ, that as we are lifted, we are saved, and we get to partake in the power and authority of Jesus Christ, who sits and reigns at the right hand of God. What a promise. What a hope. What a journey to look forward to. Let that hope spur you on to good deeds and allow it to bring in inside of you a holy perfection worked out by the Spirit of God through the power of Christ's resurrection. God bless you, Wellspring. We'll see you tomorrow.